Superstorm Sandy was a hurricane that New Yorkers could never forget, especially to those who resided on Long Island at the time. From Long Island City to the East End, hundreds of people fell victim to the storm's intensity and were forced to relocate and build from the ground up. Hurricane Sandy was a rather peculiar storm for the Long Island area. Most early forecast models didn't even predict that it would steer in the direction of New York, and to everyone's surprise, it did. But how did we get here? What made this storm so intense? And as for the victims, where are they now? One of the areas that were heavily impacted by Superstorm Sandy was Copeg, a small hamlet on the south shore of Long Island. To get a real feeling of what it was like to live through this powerful storm, I traveled to the town's harbor and spoke to Copeg resident Nancy Goldstein. She was blindsided by the intensity of the storm and stayed until the storm surge was at her doorstep. She told me the ins and outs about her tough decision to evacuate.
I stayed until I couldn't stay anymore, and the water was coming in the house, and I just grabbed whatever I was able to grab, threw the kids in the car and the dog, and off I went.
Although Nancy and her sons evacuated safely, what they'd come home back to after the storm was unimaginable.
So it was scary because when we walked in I was glad to see the house, but we walked in the house and the water was up to the door. So all this was washed away. Everything was gone. And it was very scary. So everything just there was a boat on the lawn. There was things were all over the place. Everybody it was a mess.
A big part of what pushed Hurricane Sandy so far northward were the low atmospheric pressure systems formed by southbound jet streams in the Caribbean Sea, also known as troughs. And I know all this information can seem a little bit confusing at first, but to break it down, I spoke with Eric Creighton, who is a PhD student at the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences at Stony Brook University.
Essentially, what happened with Sandy is that it was a typical hurricane. It was moving north. It got close to this upper level trough, this higher wind shear, and started to weaken. But then an interaction with that trough helped the storm redevelop and undergo extratropical transition right up until landfall.
So with this trough, would you say, as a New Yorker who was here during the storm, would you say this exacerbated the strength of the storm? And,
Absolutely.
Because it was only a Category 2, but the effects were just, lethal.
Right, yeah. So Sandy specifically was weird in that we don't get a lot of hurricanes here in the first place, right? But the ones that we have had are usually pretty quick and still tropical. They're hurricanes. Mm-hmm. Sandy actually landfalled as an extratropical cyclone, non-tropical. And I think it was it was about 945 millibars at landfall in southern New Jersey, which for something that's no longer a hurricane is a really low surface pressure. That's very not typical. You need very special circumstances to get that.
Hurricane Sandy got its nickname of Superstorm Sandy for many reasons. For one, its destructive nature was out of the ordinary, and for a Category 2 hurricane, the size of the storm was just massive. Stretching over 1,100 miles wide, Sandy primarily hit New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania, with effects even being felt in places as far as Michigan and Wisconsin. This storm system hit the New York, New Jersey area at 945 millibars, which by the time it made landfall ended up being approximately the intensity of a Category 1 hurricane. However, the storm slowed down dramatically, which created the unforgettable treacherous conditions. And these conditions were so bad that Sandy went down in history as one of the top 5 strongest hurricanes on record to hit the Northeast tri-state area. Yeah, so for, as you said, several effects and the several things that went into Hurricane Sandy, and also you mentioned that it wasn't a direct hit. It was technically, it hit and made landfall in New Jersey first. And then I want to speak about the after effects of the storm.
Right.
So, for example, in Far Rockaway, there were a lot of sinkholes and things like that, a lot of erosion. Can you tell me about how that came to be as well?
the impacts of Hurricane Sandy were in part due to its very large wind field. Tropical storm force winds extended out over 1,000 miles, which is an order of magnitude larger than is typical for a hurricane. That's because, by that point it wasn't quite a hurricane. Right. And so that large wind field means that it can drive a lot more storm surge, for example, because surge is, the water getting pushed up onto land, and a large wind field is one way that you can accomplish this more readily. So even though the winds were only, 80 miles an hour or so, that large wind field was a big part in driving that surge. And so in places like the Far Rockaways, New Jersey, you had significant storm surge exacerbated by being at high tide and being during a spring tide, which is the highest tide of the month because of the full moon. So a combination of really bad stuff, the higher tides, the really big wind field, so big surge, resulted in really significant inundation on the coastline in a way that we don't really see that often.
Right. It became very apparent as the storm was approaching the shores of Long Island that this was a hurricane that the area had never seen before. Despite New York Governor Andrew Cuomo declaring a state of emergency, people stayed. And a lot of the reasoning for this was due to Hurricane Irene, which hit the tri-state area a year before Sandy. People felt that because they didn't evacuate for Irene, that they could ride out Hurricane Sandy, but they were terribly mistaken.
Also, from a preparation standpoint, Hurricane Irene happened the previous year, and it got a lot of hype. It did a lot more freshwater flooding, rainfall resulting in flash flooding and river flooding than anything else. And so I think people on the coast were a little bit lured into complacency by that because, nothing happened during Irene, right. Nothing's going to happen during this, right? So some people didn't evacuate, and that probably played some role.
Something else that's important to take into account when it comes to this storm's strength are the temporary water channels between the barrier islands caused by storm surge. These channels are called breaches, and many of them were a direct result from this hurricane. Storm surge breaches are nothing new to Long Island. In fact, Hurricane Sandy brought 3 of them. Now, these are usually looked at as negative as they bring in saltwater intrusion and even beach erosion. But what if I told you that there's some positive impacts that have impacted Long Island waterways just like this one? Although storm surge breaches can have negative impacts on coastal communities, they're also interesting in the way that they can provide ecological benefits. An example of this would be the habitat restoration of salt marshes, which promote biodiversity. Another would be the exchanging of water and nutrients, which improves water quality.
When Sandy hit, it cleaned out the bay. The nutrient levels dropped well below the eutrophying numbers, and the bay began to recover from a health point of view. There was increase in clams, there was increase in fish that hadn't been seen for a long time showed up. And so the clammers were happy, and you could see the bottom, it wasn't all murky. And so people initially were terrified about this breach, but then they realized how good it was. On Fire Island all the way to Southampton.
Charles Flagg is an oceanographer whose research focuses on the kinematics and dynamics of the world's coastal ocean. He's done research projects on the United States east and west coasts, the Arctic, South America, East Africa, and Australia. When it comes to Hurricane Sandy, he believes a huge factor of the storm's after effect on the environment was the mixture between bay and saltwater.
The main thing that happened, one of the important things that happened with Hurricane Sandy and the breach was the exchange of ocean water with bay water. And it increased the salinity in the bay. That has essentially no impact on critters. They can handle a wide range of salts. But the main thing that it did was it cleaned the bay. So there's a large population clustered along the southern half of Long Island, and there are sewer systems and all that sort of stuff ends up in the bay. So the bay has been eutrophied, That means there's a lot of nutrients that reach the bay, and you have phytoplankton blooms, and when they die, they fall to the bottom and they use up oxygen. They cloud the water so that plants, particularly seagrass, die off. And so that had really happened by the time Sandy hit.
So right now I'm on my way to talk to someone who used to work for the Department of Transportation during the time of Hurricane Sandy, and he helped facilitate the cleanup during and after the storm. So moving away down trees and debris in the way so that light restoration companies could come and restore power. And yes, I'm gonna go see him now.
Go, Rocky Road. Go, Rocky Road. Come on. Go. The storm came in pretty tough. And first it started off with the heavy rain and then the high winds. The rains were not too bad at first, but slowly our sumps were filling up and spilling into the roads. We lost Northern State Parkway, that flooded out. We lost Jericho Turnpike by Robbins Lane, that sump filled up, flooded out. We lost 25A right by East Norwich by Rothman Steakhouse, that completely flooded out. So our objective was to take care of one problem at a time, but we couldn't really do anything until the rain stopped.
The rain was relentless, and it rained for several days at a time, which left roads uncrossable. Dominic says that this made the aftermath cleanup difficult because he and his team had to be cautious of hidden hazards like downed power lines. In these situations, Department of Transportation crews would have to call for backup.
Whenever we entered an area that a tree was down and there were wires laying on the trees, we stand back. We're not allowed to go near the tree. We look, first you got to dictate the road, so say Jericho Turnpike, and then every so often there's a mile marker that tells you the distance from each 1,000 feet. So it breaks it down. So what I would do is call my dispatcher, give them mile marker number, road number, like 25A, mile marker 1010, a side street, say Robbins Lane, so they knew exactly where it was. They were really, really busy. So for them to get to my issue, it took days, unless it was a primary artery, like the 495, like 25A, like 25, Route 106. So we had a crew doing that. And so there was a lot going on with the flooding and the trees. But after 2 weeks or so, we started to get a handle on things. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Throughout this project and throughout covering this thing for about 5 months or so, I've honestly gotten more of appreciation for Long Island. It's crazy how erosion and things like that can honestly be the demise of this island, and hurricane seasons are very dangerous, and we really need to take precaution when it comes to that, because Long Island isn't here forever, but we can keep it looking nice as long as we can, for as long as possible. This has been Miles Reese, Stony Brook Media Group.